James Taranto wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal addressing the issue of sexual assault on college campuses. Now, he's really concerned about false reports or female students filing false reports against male students. Now, he brings up some interesting scenarios where both parties are drinking. So I want to read you the parts of his piece that are considered controversial, and then you can judge for yourself. He writes the following: if two drunk drivers are in a collision, now he's making a comparison between drunk driving and having sex while under the influence, one doesn't determine fault on the basis of demographic details, such as each driver's sex. But when two drunken college students collide, the male one is almost always presumed to be at fault. His diminished capacity owing to alcohol is not a mitigating factor, but her diminished capacity is an aggravating factor for him. So he's saying that there's a double standard there. Two people get drunk and they make a really bad decision. Why is it that the woman is the victim and the man is the person who's preying on her?
Right.
Yeah, the aggressor.
Well, it depends. It depends on if they made a joint decision or if only one of them made the decision and the other person was incapacitated, passed out, or could make a conscious decision. If she made a conscious decision, I don't think it's even that controversial, although some on the left disagree with us and some student policies disagree with us.
He starts talking about a Stanford policy, and I thought that this was interesting. You might disagree with it. A Stanford policy states that sexual assault occurs when a person is incapable of giving consent. A person is legally incapable of giving consent if intoxicated by drugs and or alcohol. In other words, any sexual activity while intoxicated to any degree constitutes sexual assault. This is true even if the activity was explicitly agreed to by a person capable of making rational, reasoned decisions, and even if the partners are in an ongoing relationship or marriage.
Yeah, I totally disagree with that.
Yeah.
So I think that's people going too far and then allowing the James Tarantos of the world to pretend like there is no such thing as, whether it's date rape or rape because someone is unconscious, etc. So can a woman make a decision to have consensual sex while intoxicated? Absolutely. I don't know what percentage of the sex in the country goes on, 20%, 30%? I mean, you're going to call all those rape? 30% of the sex in the country is rape? That's crazy talk. And they say even in the middle of a marriage or a relationship. So you and your wife go out and have 2 drinks apiece and you come back and you have sex and it's by definition rape? On which planet? And on the liberal planet that is some of these universities, honestly. And that's why when I was at college, I wasn't a liberal, because they drove me crazy with bullshit like this.
Unfortunately, we have this really strange climate where we have 2 extremes, right? We have the extremely liberal colleges, as you put it, that kind of go overboard when it comes to sexual assault. And then you have colleges that just refuse to report anything. They refuse to prosecute anyone who has been accused of rape. And by the way, prosecuting someone who's been accused of rape is not to say that they're immediately guilty. It means that they'll stand trial based on some sort of evidence indicating that some wrongdoing happened, right? But for some reason, we lack a middle ground where we do what we use common sense to go after people who probably did go do rape or sexual assault or molestation or whatever it is. But anyway, what I don't like about the tone of his entire piece is it automatically focuses on something that is not really that big of an issue in the grand scheme of things. Sexual assault, rape on college campuses, that is a big issue. And oftentimes you hear these arguments from conservatives that the real issue is the false reporting and the false claims, right? Well, the FBI did a study on this, and I should note that the vast majority of sexual assaults and rapes don't even get reported, okay? But what the FBI found was that when it comes to unfounded rape accusations, they only account for 8% of all reports.
So to me, that cuts in 2 different ways. Number one, just because somebody's accused of rape doesn't mean they actually did the rape, right? 8% of the time, they didn't do the rape. So you have to have somewhat of an open mind.
Right.
On the other hand, if you think there's an epidemic of false rape reports, that's not true. It's factually not correct. So when James Taranto writes this thing about like, oh my God, everybody's going to get charged with rape as soon as they're both drunk. That doesn't happen. It certainly doesn't happen with great frequency, right? And number 2, he makes it seem like the only rape accusations are the ones where they both consented and yet the guy gets blamed.
Yeah.
But that's a tiny minority of the cases. The great majority of the cases are the woman's completely passed out and a guy takes advantage of her anyway, or there's date rape, or There, you know, all the different kinds of rape. That's the great majority. It's not like, well, you know, they both collided with one another, right? No, usually, in most of the cases, they didn't collide with one another. The guy held her down, right? Or she was passed out to begin with and couldn't give consent. If it's, James, if it's a question of consent and they both gave consent, we're with you. To us, that's not a controversial issue, right? But if she didn't actually give consent, and yes, it would go the other way. If the guy was passed out and somehow she was able to have sex with him or molest him or sexually assault him while he was passed out, that would also be sexual assault. It's not that complicated.
Yeah. And by the way, that 8% statistic, there are some caveats to that I should definitely mention, because 8% does sound pretty high, right? But rape is labeled as unfounded by the FBI if the victim didn't fight back, the attacker didn't use a weapon, the victim didn't sustain injuries, the victim had a prior relationship with the attacker.
Man, that's a tough standard.
So that
kind of describes date rape too.
So in that 8%, I mean, think about it. There could be situations where a woman said, I was raped, but the guy didn't use a weapon. He held her down using physical force, right?
And
using his own body.
And she didn't, quote unquote, fight back enough or sustain enough injuries?
Exactly. So just keep that in mind when you look at that 8% statistic, because to me, 8% seems like a relatively small number when you consider how prevalent sexual assault and rape is on college campuses. But if that number is still really high to everyone who's watching, I mean, think about all the exceptions they make.
You're right.
So.